Just away. We had been in Las Flores, the border town nearest us, about 8 miles from my parents' house, and a little bit closer to theirs. And I remember because they went out of their way to pick me up. And on the drive to Las Flores, we passed sugarcane fields and that big bump that lands on the military highway that leads us straight to the border. And there was an excitement, for us to meet and talk and compare notes on the worlds that we conquered. But for the most part, we were excited to see Las Flores, to see Mexico, to see Arturo's, which was our local bar since we were 15 and 16. It was a place that gave us dignity, the dignity to drink and pretend to be adults. In Mexico, the drinking age is 18, but for us, they made an exception. Well, us and everybody else who could fit the dress code and pay the bill. And Arturo's is the kind of place that it was much fancier than the dusty border town around us, and it was something reminiscent of the Prohibition era. Elegant carpet, the meseros, the waiters dressed in white and with a black bow tie, and siempre nos hablaban en usted. I remember that night, because it was the same as it was in high school. The dignity granted to us to drink, they had pissed away, ordering drinks like Tom Collins and screwdrivers and other kid drinks like Tequila Sunrise. I was different. I ordered Cuba Libre, because there's something to ordering a Cuba Libre that summons not just the Caribbean, but everything from Tamaulipas, where I stood, all the way to Tierra del Fuego. And as the night grew and the drinks continued, I realized that there was a gulf yawning between us. They were somewhere else. They were the joiners. They were the people who thought about groups. David Campos thinking about scholarships and internships and all the other ships, and Rene Gonzalez, who was at Harvard and explained to us that the Puerto Rican Student Association had much better party than the Mexican political group. All believed, but after a while boring. My head was somewhere else. My head was thinking about, but naively thinking about ideas. I learned about linguistic relativism, the notion that anybody and everybody speaks something equal. And I was lost in the idea that I learned in a literature class that everything is a text. As the night grew on, I'm ashamed to say, but I became more interested in the world that I would have and less interested in their conversation. And actually, as we left, I started to realize that not only were we at different places, not only were we coming at the world differently, we looked different. They were wearing their sweatshirts, their college sweatshirts, Harvard crimson and Stanford red and whatever the fuck color brown is. And they all three of them. They had Rene, Juan Contreras, and Rene Gonzalez and David Campos. They all had these like 90210 sideburns that ended right here, you know? I had a beard, and I grew the beard because it gave me the same dignity in Austin that I had in Las Flores. It was my way of being connected to the world, and Las Flores for me was this port that brought in Jamaican rum and Oaxacan artisan work, and as we're walking back, I remember thinking about their sweatshirts and their blue jeans and their Nikes, and I was wearing something a little ridiculous. I was wearing this white, long sleeve, white chemise, this Indian chemise made of thin fabric, and I remember it had this embroidered floral, like very intricate embroidered floral print that ran from the collar all the way to the tail, you know? Chemise, like, you know. Actually, this is true. I'm writing with this stuff to the show here, and I'm riding with a Pakistani cab driver, and I ask him, so I'm in the car, and I say, so he's got one of these Pakistani things that comes down to here, and I'm like, so what is this called? And he's like, oh, it's called a chemise arabi, you know? And I'm like, oh, chemise, I've got this thing, it's a chemise. And I'm like, what is a chemise? He's like, chemise, you know those things that Indian guys wear here, long sleeve, full thing? And he's like, oh yes, blues, you know? And they're like, oh, blues for women, you could just say blues. And I think, and it reminded me of something, which was that the button on that chemise was on the other side, you know? And you could have thought of it then as like a blouse, or something that's a sign of women's clothing. But I thought of it as like this international thing, you know? Like the metric system, the buttons be on the other side, you know? And so I'm wearing like these khaki pants, like Gap khaki pants, and like clearance sale rack, you know? So like they're khaki, but like in the shade in the wrong direction, like a little bit too light, you know? And I was wearing these Birkenstock sandals, Birkenstock Arizona. Iceland after all I said in my head. And they had two straps, and it said made in Germany. You know, I had the sandals made in Germany. And if I was wearing socks or not, I'd rather not say. But in my defense, it was 1992, and it was winter. And it was 1992, you know? Like, in 1992, crossing the border was easier. I mean, in 1992, yes, there was a drug war, and there were drugs crossing, thank God. And but the drugs were crossing, and there were dogs to take care of that. When it came to people, you know, mojados were mojados, and they weren't walking on the bridge. And gringos were gringos, whether local or tourists, it didn't matter. They got the straight way through. And us, the majority of people, the majority of us, we were Mexicans with some form of right to be in America, from green cards to passports, and all we had to do was state an allegiance. U.S. citizen, U.S. citizen, U.S. citizen. This is before NAFTA. This is before policing in a certain kind of way. There was no fence that ran from the Pacific north of Tijuana into California. No fence in El Paso. And so I remember that day of U.S. citizen, U.S. citizen, U.S. citizen. Juan goes through, and Rene goes through, and everybody's gone through with U.S. citizen. And we're at the customs agent, and he's there, and I'm like, U.S. citizen. And he's like, do you have a driver's license? And I mean, driver's licenses are still made out of cardboard at this point. And so it struck me as weird that they would be asking for a license, but I obliged. So I remember I pulled out my wallet, and I was like, Texas driver's license with an Austin address. An Austin address that made me 300 miles north, more a U.S. citizen than where I had grown on the edge of Texas. And he takes it, and he asks me, where were you born? Well, I was born here in Mexico. And your purpose for visiting Mexico? I'm here catching up with some high school friends of mine. And again, the same question, where were you born? And I answer, Mexico. And somewhere in there, I realized that he was being a little suspicious. And so the more kind of gringo I became, and the more gringo stiff I became, and well, yes, you were a citizen. And in that, he's like, what'd you say first? Well, I'm here with my high school friends, and I'm a student. And he looks at my friends, you know, I don't remember the guys from 90210, but that whole kind of chill. And then he looks at me, beard, I had hair then, curly hair, a little Jufro. And he looks at like the third world fabric of my shirt, you know, like not trying hard enough to get the quality right. And he says, you're gonna have to go over here. And there was this way that he kind of eased me to this door.